Good to see you tonight. It's good to be with you. It's good to be seen, I guess. It's good to have my mother-in-law with us this evening. And I want to extend our sympathy to her again. Passing a good companion, good man, good friend. His funeral was this past Friday, and certainly our hearts go out to you. Also, Karen Stone, she's not with us this evening, but her father-in-law also passed away. And the memorial service for him will be at Jay Collins Funeral Home this Saturday I think there'll be a visitation from 11 to 1, and then a service will be conducted at 1. If you have an opportunity to go out there and be with Karen, that would be grand. I know she would appreciate your support. It's good to see Karen back with us tonight and her daughter. I know you've been sick, haven't you? Well, I'm glad you could join this party again, because most of us have been sick too. And so we've been, it's been going everywhere. I believe Carol is unclean. That's why he's sitting in an odd spot tonight. I think the Old Testament would instruct you to cry unclean if you've had a fever in the last 24 hours. So, just fair warning. But it is good to see all of you, and especially those of you that have been sick and are better. My grandchildren, some of them are still sick and trying to recover. So it's just been a rough time, but we're glad and thankful to be here. I'm excited about this study tonight. I'll be honest with you. I'm not sure how we're going to keep my thoughts together, because they're all over the place. And of course, that's probably nothing new to you. When I say that, you probably figure that happens just about every Wednesday night. But it's typically not the case when you read a chapter like chapter 22 from 1 Samuel, which is where we are tonight, and 23. You might read it and say that's just interesting historical facts and means nothing more, but there's a rich wealth of information and lessons to be gleaned here, and I want to see if I can slow down in my mind enough to try to put all the pieces together. As you know, as we closed our class last time, David had fled into the land of the Philistines to seek refuge from Saul, who was trying to kill him. And when it was discovered that he was that David that had killed Goliath, they brought him before the king, and David escaped. How? How did he get out of that situation? The angel of the Lord delivered him. That's what he said by inspiration. And of course, he helped the angel of the Lord by acting crazy and letting spit run down his face and acting like a madman. I'm still surprised, and I think it's interesting, and we have to credit God and his intervention. Be that as it may, crazy or not, he is the man that killed their champion and caused a great defeat and humiliation in Philistia. So you think they would have seen this as an opportunity to pay him back, or pay back the champion of Israel, but he slipped through their fingers, and again, he did his part, played crazy, and God did his part and had him delivered. That's how we ended. So we pick up in verse 1 of chapter 22 that David departed from there and escaped to the cave of Adullam. So when his brothers and all his father's house heard it, they went down there to him. And everyone who was in distress, everyone who was in debt, everyone who was discontented, gathered to him. So he became captain over them, and there were about 400 men with him. Pardon me for saying this, but we could say in contemporary terms, all the deplorables have gathered around David. And they're in this cave with him. And so now his band of deplorables are an army of 400. But David went from there to Mizpah of Moab. And he said to the king of Moab, "Please let my father and mother come here with you till I know that God will do for me." So he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the time that David was in the stronghold. Let me ask you this question. Why would David go to Moab and ask the king of Moab for refuge for his parents? Why would he do that? How about turning with me to the book of Ruth? Hold your finger here. And let's go to the book of Ruth, the last chapter, chapter 4, verse 18. This is the genealogy of Perez. Perez begat Hezron. Hezron begat Ram, and Ram begat Amminadab. Amminadab begat Nahshon, and Nahshon begat Solomon. Solomon begat Boaz, and Boaz begat Obed. Obed begat Jesse. Jesse begat David. Now, why does this matter? Okay, his great-grandmother was who? Ruth. And what was Ruth? She was a Moabite. So David already had a family connection to the Moabites. But in chapter 14 of 1 Samuel, Saul had already waged war against Moab and Ammon. And so they were enemies of Saul. So David probably thought he could take advantage of the fact that here he was an outlaw, himself on the run, and he has an army of 400 deplorables with him, and they're also the enemies of Saul. And so they probably would have given him a warm welcome, and indeed they did. And so he was able to find refuge for his parents. Now, verse 5, someone is introduced to us who is a very significant character. Now, the prophet Gad said to David, "Do not stay in the stronghold. Depart and go to the land of Judah." So David departed and went into the forest of Herath. Again, before we go any further, who is Gad? Well, in 2 Samuel, he will be identified by God as David's seer, as David's prophet. It's surmised that Samuel, no doubt, had dispatched Gad to aid David and encourage David. It's worthy of note that at this time, among the Israelite people, the spiritually minded individuals, i.e. the deplorables, are gathering around David. And you say, well, I thought the deplorables were in debt. Well, they probably were. Why would you suppose they were in debt? Who would have put them in debt? Who did Samuel say would put them in debt? The king. And so they're seeking refuge from their heavy taxation, no doubt. And so they're with David, and so is Gad and other prophets, and it will not be long until we see the priests also gathering around David. And so the priests and the prophets are with David, and they are not with Saul. And so, again, as you read these things in this light, you see how there's a transformation taking place. And all these things are building. It's a crescendo that's taking place among the people of Israel. And it's just worthy of note that Gad is now instructing and or advising David, don't stay in the stronghold, go to the land of Judah. So David went home, and that's where David wanted to be anyway. So David departed and went into the forest of Herath. When Saul heard that David and the men who were with him had been discovered, Saul was staying in Gibeah under a tamarisk tree in Ramah, with his spear in his hand, all his servants standing about him. Saul said to his servants who stood about him, "Hear now, you Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? All of you have conspired against me, and there is no one who reveals to me that my son has made a covenant with the son of Jesse. And there is not one of you who is sorry for me, or reveals to me that my son has stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait as it is this day." Whoa, wait a minute. Was there any truth at all to what Saul just said? None? Was there a covenant between David and Jonathan? There was, wasn't there? And was this covenant to destroy Saul? No. But that's what Saul is saying. You know, it's interesting how you can take an element of truth and spin it into an outright lie. But it makes it a little more believable, I suppose. But notice who he's addressing. Who's in his council meeting? Oh, you who? Benjamites. Well, what tribe was Saul from? So how far-reaching is his influence now? Among his own tribe, his own family. Now, he has lost his mind. Don't any of you feel sorry for me? Now, should they feel sorry? What does this tell you about this man? I mean, what are you learning as you think about Saul? What kind of man is he? Well, he's crazy. He's lost his mind. He has gone mad, literally, out of a jealous rage, an unjust jealous rage against David. And so he is literally spiraling out of control. His whole life is falling apart. He's accusing his own son of conspiring against him to have him destroyed, which was absurd. Jonathan would not have done such a thing. David certainly was not guilty of such a thing, but that's what he's saying. Saul would have done himself some favors had he accumulated in his council chamber men from other tribes and had extended his influence perhaps in that way in appointing some captains over hundreds and thousands from other tribes rather than his own people. But he just wasn't thinking straight. So, all that being said, we pick up with an individual we were introduced to in the last chapter, chapter 21. Then entered Dag the Edomite, who was set over the servants of Saul. Now, what kind of man was he? He was an Edomite. And what position does he have? He's a leader of the servants of Saul. And he said, I saw the son of Jesse going to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub. And he inquired of the Lord for him, gave him provisions, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Now hold on. Are those facts true? Are those true facts? He did. Did he give him provisions? He gave him holy bread, didn't he? So the facts that he's speaking are true. But what is he leaving out? How willing was Ahimelech to help David? Under what pretext was he willing to help David? What fact did Dag leave out that was of great importance? You remember when David came to Ahimelech? What was he saying to him? What was David's claim? I'm here on the king's business. So as far as Ahimelech was concerned, he wasn't helping David per se. He was helping David, but he was primarily helping the king. That's what he thought, because this was the king's son-in-law. And so if the king's son-in-law is on the king's business and he's in need, I'll take care of him. Why? Because he's the king's son-in-law and he's in need. So this is a fact that should have been mentioned, but it was not mentioned. And so it's painting a picture for a madman who's lost his mind, who thinks no one feels sorry for him, and Dag is playing up to that. And Saul is letting him feed that. So the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests who were in Nob, and they all came to the king, and Saul said, Hear now, son of Ahitub. He answered, Here I am, my lord. Saul said to him, Why have you conspired against me, you and the son of Jesse, and that you have given him bread and a sword, and have inquired of God for him, that he should rise against me to lie in wait as it is this day? So Ahimelech answered the king and said, And who among all your servants is as faithful as David, who is the king's son-in-law, who goes at your bidding and is honorable in your house? Did I then begin to inquire of God for him? Far be it from me. Let not the king impute anything to his servant, or to any in the house of my father, for your servant knew nothing of all this, little or much. I don't know what you're talking about. The king said, You shall surely die, Ahimelech, you and all your father's house. The king said to the guards who stood about him, Turn and kill the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled and did not tell it to me. But the servants of the king would not lift their hands to strike the priests of the Lord. And the king said to Dag, You turn and kill the priest. So Dag, the Edomite, turned and struck the priest, and killed on that day 85 men who wore a linen ephod. Also Nob, the city of the priest, he struck with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and nursing infants, oxen and donkeys and sheep, with the edge of the sword. Now one of the sons of Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, named Abiathar, escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar told David that Saul had killed the Lord's priest. So David said to Abiathar, I knew that day when Dag the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have caused the death of all the persons of your father's house. Stay with me, do not fear, for he who seeks my life seeks your life, but with me you shall be saved. Wow. You remember in chapter 15, God instructed Saul to do what to the Amalekites? Did he? And the best of the sheep and the oxen. But now, among his own people, and in a city of priests, he orders an Edomite to annihilate them. Women, children, nursing infants, sheep, oxen, utterly destroyed them. It's insane, isn't it? When leaders will turn against their own people in preference for others. It's insane. Would you agree with that? Yes. So if someone is in our country illegally, I'm just saying, and we're going to give them whatever, and we're going to say to our men and women who are serving in our armed forces, sorry, you don't get a paycheck, and we're going to shut the government down, because I'm just saying such behavior is a sign of sheer insanity. It's madness. And you think Saul is the only one that ever was guilty of such madness? We see it all the time, don't we? Well, if we watch the news, perhaps we are aware of what I'm talking about. But again, that's the world we live in. And so we have people that are willing to hurt their own citizens, the best among us, in order to make some political point. What's Saul doing? He's defending who here? Whose honor is he defending? Himself, period. Was he thinking about God? Nope. Was he thinking about the people of Judah or Israel? Nope. Who's he thinking about? Nobody feels sorry for me. You know, when Jesus said, if a man would save his life, he must what? Do what? You know, we hear that and we think, that goes against the grain. How can I save my life by losing it? Well, notice here the other side of that equation. If a man saves his life or seeks to save his life, what eventually happens to him? If all you're thinking about is yourself, if everything in the world revolves around you and what you need and what you want, eventually you will go mad and you will lose your sanity and you will lose your life. Yes, Brian?
Don't forget all of the problems that he's accusing everybody else of bringing upon him are all his own doing, where he defied God and at the time where he presented the sacrifices because he couldn't wait for Samuel. It's all his doing.
That's right.
He's blaming everybody else for his situation.
It's never his fault, is it? This is a sad situation. David took his parents, carried them to the king of Moab, sought refuge for them. You know, when you think about that, you think that's a nice gesture. That was a good thing to do. But when you consider the circumstance under which David did this, if ever there was a time that someone could have argued, you know, I'm not in a position to help my parents. I mean, it's all I can do to keep from getting killed. Because every day the king is seeking an opportunity to take my life. And I'm not even welcome in my own home. And so if there was ever a time, and I'm on the run, I have no place to live, I'm having to live in caves and hide out among the enemies of my own people. I mean, how could I possibly, but he did not allow any of those circumstances to prevent him from taking care of his aged parents at this difficult time. You know, Moses said what about honoring your father and mother? What promise?
It may be well with thee, live long on the earth.
It's one of those interesting truisms, isn't it? Of course, it's the law of God, but when you think about it, did David benefit from helping his parents? Well, of course. Was David a prosperous man? Yes. Did David face difficulties? Yes. Did he face setbacks and challenges? Yes. But overall, I think we would all agree that David was a man blessed and defended by God. But like all other people, he faced challenges. But he was a blessed man, and we're still talking about David, a Hebrew monarch centuries ago. And here we are in good old southern part of the United States on Wednesday night talking about this old Hebrew king And you say, well, why are we still talking about him? I'm telling you, when you think about the quality of the individual, I spent a lot of time the last few weeks talking about all the negative side to David's character. He was a bloody man. He was not perfect. He did lie quite a bit, and he did kill a lot of people. Sometimes you think more than he needed to. He was what he was. But we can't look at just those parts of David. We have to see David as a whole. And when you look at him as a whole, you see the whole man. You realize that there's far more than just a murderer and an adulterer and a liar. There was also a man who cared for his parents and who took the honor of God's people very, very seriously. All right, chapter 23. Any question about chapter 22 or comments? All right. Then they told David, saying, look, the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they are robbing the threshing floors. Keilah is a city in Judah. Who's supposed to be in charge of Judah? Who's supposed to be protecting Judah? But David finds out the Philistines are fighting against Keilah, and they're robbing the threshing floors. This was obviously harvest time, and they're bringing in their grain, and they decide to go take advantage of that, and they're stealing it from them. So David inquired of the Lord, saying, shall I go and attack these Philistines? And the Lord said to David, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. Here's my question to you. How did David speak to God? And how did God speak back to David? We're not told here, are we?
Divine communication.
Sir?
A divine communication.
It was a divine communication. There's no doubt about that. How it was done, we don't know. Some have suggested that the Urim and Thummim, that's how you pronounce it, was used. That's not stated. It is mentioned. I know that later Saul would consult the Urim and Thummim. It's a weird name. I know. It's just hard to pronounce. Of course, it didn't do Saul any good. He had to go to the witch of Endor on that occasion. So there was such to be consulted, but we're not told that. Was it Gad, his personal seer, that he's asking? Perhaps he could have been asking the prophet. Or David himself was a prophet, and he could have simply spoken in prayer to God, and God could have simply answered David. He certainly was inspired, as was Gad. So we don't know. But he's asking God, should I go and attack the Philistines? The Lord said, go and attack the Philistines and save Keilah. But David's men said to him, look, we are afraid here in Judah. Why? Why were they afraid in Judah? Well, because they're all outlaws. And now they're all associated with the most notorious, the most wanted man in Israel. And they're all associated with him. And so we're doing good just to stay under the radar, stay out of trouble. And you want us to go on a campaign to deliver this city? I mean, we can't do that without being known or being, talked about. Well, they were right. We're afraid here in Judah. How much more than if we go to Keilah against the armies of the Philistines? I mean, not only do we have Saul trying to kill us, we're going to go in battle against the Philistines. I mean, come on, David. So David inquired of the Lord once again. And the Lord answered him and said, arise, go down to Keilah, for I will deliver the Philistines into your own hand. And David and his men went to Keilah and fought with the Philistines, struck them with a mighty blow, took away their livestock. So David saved the inhabitants of Keilah. There's something else to be said about the deplorables that have gathered around David. They're becoming something other than deplorables, aren't they? They're not just a band of deplorables anymore. They're becoming a great army. And under David's leadership, they're going to become a mighty force to be reckoned with. What does that tell you about David? What's that? He was a man after God's own heart. That's true.
Great leader.
He was a great leader. And as a great leader, what does he do when he's facing a very difficult situation? That's the first thing he did. And those people saw that. And they were reassured with that. He went to the Lord a second time when they expressed fear. So David said, I want to be sure. And he went back and inquired again. And the Lord said, I got you. Now it happened when Abiathar, the son of Ahimelech, fled to David at Keilah, that he went down with an ephod in his hand. Saul was told that David, so, this Abiathar, by the way, is the one who escaped from that massacre at Nob. And so he's now aligned himself with David. And you're going to see more of this. All of these people are starting to align themselves with David. And now David is going to deliver the inhabitants of Keilah. Now, if you lived in Keilah and David came and delivered you from the oppression of your neighbors, and you got back your livestock and your wheat that you had just harvested, you would be glad, would you not? What would you think of David?
Probably a great deal.
Well, you'd think a lot of him, wouldn't you? You would appreciate him, wouldn't you? So if Saul came knocking on your door, you would say, I don't know where he is, right? Now Saul was told that David had gone to Keilah, so Saul said, God has delivered him into my hand, for he has shut himself in by entering a town that has gates and bars. And Saul called all the people together for war to go down to Keilah to besiege David and his men. When David knew that Saul plotted evil against him, he said to Abiathar the priest, bring the ephod here. David said, O Lord God of Israel, your servant has certainly heard that Saul seeks to come to Keilah to destroy the city for my sake. Will the men of Keilah deliver me into his hand? Will Saul come down as your servant has heard? O Lord God of Israel, I pray tell your servant. And the Lord said, he will come down. David said, will the men of Keilah deliver me and my men into the hand of Saul? And the Lord said, they will deliver you. So David and his men, about 600, arose and departed from Keilah and went wherever they could go. Then it was told Saul that David had escaped from Keilah, so he halted the expedition. He's now grown his army quite a bit. He's no longer 400, it's now 600. But now we've got this ephod. What was the ephod? It was a garment the priest wore. And it was like a vest or a breastplate that hung over the front. Had stones on it. It was decorative, of course. But it certainly was something the priest wore. My question is, what does this ephod have to do with inquiring of the Lord? This was not the Urim and Thummim. Unless the Urim and Thummim was associated with it and we're just not told. I don't know. Anyone have any ideas, or can you shed some light on what's going on here? Other than maybe bringing Abiathar with this vest on, in perhaps an official capacity, he was able to consult directly through the priest what he needed to know. I don't know. And of course, here's another question. The Urim and Thummim is an odd, and I'm not using that disrespectfully, but it's just an unusual article of clothing with the 12 stones in it. And how it was used, we don't know. I think it was Josephus who said that when the ephod, or not the ephod, but when that Urim and Thummim was worn by the priest, that when you inquired of the Lord a yes or no answer, that the stone would light up. That's what Josephus said. Others say, no, it was just a little pouch sewn into the vest, and the stone were set in the pouch. And the stones had markings on either side of them. One represented yes, the other represented no. And it was kind of like rolling dice. And you would take them out and you would roll the dice. And if it said yes or no, that was your answer from God. That's one way of understanding it. And the bottom line is we have no earthly idea how it was used. We do know that there were times, rare instances, but it was used to inquire as to the will of the Lord. And that's all I know about it. And if anyone knows more, again, I'd be glad to hear your thoughts on it or what it may represent or any thoughts that associate with it.
Joseph Smith that took a clue from this very concept to have his stone through which he interpreted the Book of Mormon.
Oh, was that? Probably where he got that idea. But I guess my question here is, what is the ephod? Which is just a general garment worn by priests. In fact, Samuel himself wore an ephod. In fact, when he was a little boy, he wore an ephod. So I don't know what the significance is here. I've searched and I can't find anything to really shed light on it. If anyone knows, I'd be happy to hear from you. But again, Abiathar's here and he has the ephod, and David inquires of the Lord. And so here's my question to you about the people of Keilah. Are they going to betray David? They said they would. But here's another. Let's look at this moment in time. This is a snapshot in time. The people of Keilah, Lynn, were grateful that David had delivered them. But when Saul brings his army out there, they're going to be scared to death. and they're going to say, well, yeah, he's over there. They'll deliver him into their hands. But when this moment passes, and Saul retreats, and he did. He pulls his army back and ceases from the expedition. In time, the people of Keilah, what are they going to remember?
David and how good he was.
And who's gathering around David? Priests? Prophets? An army? I mean, he's gaining in strength and numbers. Now here's another question. When David went to Keilah, what was in it for David? He was risking what? His life. Why? Why was he risking his life? Because people came and asked him to go and deliver the people of Keilah. What was the king supposed to be doing? He should have been delivering the people of Keilah. What does that tell you about Saul? He's so preoccupied with killing David and making people feel sorry for him, he didn't have time to protect his own cities and his own territory. He ought to have been ashamed of himself. But here David is doing what the job Saul should be doing. But he's not doing it for his own sake, his own glory. You know, if Saul just would be a little better politician, maybe, he would understand if I would just play my cards a little better, not be so consumed with jealousy, I might be able to amass an army myself. But as Saul is decreasing in influence, and killing the priest of Nob didn't win any points with the people anywhere in Israel. There wasn't anyone that was going to respect Saul any longer. They might have feared him, but they're not going to respect him, and they're not going to reverence him. They're not going to see him as the great leader they once thought he was going to be. They dread, perhaps, having to deal with him, knowing that he'll turn his sword against his own people, even the men of God, if he chooses to. So, David stayed in strongholds in the wilderness and remained in the mountains in the wilderness of Ziph. Saul sought him every day, but God did not deliver him into his hand. So David saw that Saul had come out to seek his life, and David was in the wilderness of Ziph in a forest. And Jonathan, Saul's son, arose and went to David in the woods and strengthened his hand in God. And he said to him, "Do not fear, for the hand of Saul my father shall not find you. You shall be king over Israel, and I shall be next to you. Even my father Saul knows that." So the two of them made a covenant before the Lord, and David stayed in the woods, and Jonathan went to his own house. Wow. That reveals something, doesn't it?
It's unusual that Jonathan knew how to find David, but Saul couldn't find him.
That's what I'm thinking. He can be found. 30,000 emails can be discovered if we could just unbleach them. We can find them. It's there to be discovered. I know it can be. We just have to find the right people to uncover it. Did I say that out loud? Yes, I did. These thoughts pop in my head, and I need to start watching the news. So, did Jonathan expect something from David?
Looks like he expected to be second in command.
That's right. I'm going to be your right-hand man. And my daddy knows this. And he knew that his daddy was consumed with hatred toward him and jealousy. But there's nothing either one of them can do to stop it. What did David also know all throughout everything we've been reading and what we're about to read? What did David already know? For a fact.
And he would be king.
He already knew that. He'd already been anointed. By whom?
Samuel.
And so God had already made it clear, David, you're going to be the next king. He knew this. You talk about restraint and behaving wisely. If you ever want to know what it means to behave wisely under adverse circumstances, just study the life of David and see how this man sees the larger picture. He sees down the stream of time. He doesn't overplay his hand. He doesn't lose control. He doesn't let his anger get the best of him. There were times it almost did. I think it was Abigail who was able to stop him from taking vengeance on one occasion. Well, that was good that Abigail was able to step in. But for the most part, David kept his cool and was able to maintain himself, seeing, again, the larger picture. So did Jonathan. It was not to be, however, with Jonathan, unfortunately. But I think that was certainly their intention for the two of them and their plan. And so David stayed in the woods, and Jonathan went back to his own house. So at this point, Saul could accuse Jonathan of what? Hindering prosecution, maybe? I mean, you know where this guy is, and you're not telling me. Anyway, he never told his father, apparently. The Ziphites came up to Saul at Gibeah, saying, is David not hiding with us in strongholds in the woods and the hills of Hachilah, which is on the south of Jeshimon? Now therefore, O king, come down according to all the desire of your soul, to come down, and our part shall be to deliver him into the king's hand. Boy, David has friends everywhere, doesn't he? I mean, he's gaining in strength and influence, but it takes time. And it's not yet his time. So Saul said, blessed are you of the Lord, for you have compassion on me. Please go and find out for sure. And I can't help but notice this. You have compassion on who? What was Saul's driving force in life? What was motivating him each and every day?
Envy.
What's that?
Envy, jealousy.
Envy, jealousy. But it's all about me. It's all about me. I mean, when you think about David and his son Jonathan, it was rarely about David or Jonathan. It was always about the Lord, the Lord's people, and defending the Lord's cause. It wasn't about himself. Saul was thinking only of himself. You had compassion on me. You betrayers of this good man delivered this innocent blood into my hand. I'm thankful for that. Please go and find out for sure and see the place where his hideout is, who has seen him there. Well, your own son, for a matter of fact. For I am told he is very crafty. See therefore and take knowledge of all the lurking places where he hides, and come back to me with certainty, and I will go with you. And it shall be, if he is in the land, I will search for him throughout all the clans of Judah. Wouldn't it be nice if he was searching throughout all the clans of Judah for the Philistines that were stealing their crops? And anyway, so they arose and went to Ziph before Saul, but David and his men were in the wilderness of Maon, in the plain of the south of Jeshimon. When Saul and his men went to seek him, they told David. Therefore he went down to the rock and stayed in the wilderness of Maon. And when Saul heard that, he pursued David in the wilderness of Maon. Then Saul went on one side of the mountain, and David and his men on the other side of the mountain. So David made haste to get away from Saul, for Saul and his men were encircling David and his men to take them. It's over. He's surrounded. He has nowhere to go. He's boxed in. But a messenger came to Saul saying, hurry and come, for the Philistines have invaded the land. Therefore Saul returned from pursuing David, went against the Philistines, so they called the place the Rock of Escape. David went up from there and dwelt in strongholds at En-Gedi. Aren't you thankful that David was so lucky? I mean, he led a charmed life. I mean, okay. So did Providence allow the Philistine to invade the land? Did we start with that domino? Or where do we start with Providence intervening? Was it just the messenger? I mean, I don't know how we could ever answer questions like that. But I do know you're right. There's no question. This is the hand of God delivering David from a no-win situation. When you've done all you can do, you've gone as far as you can go, you've tried everything you can possibly try. When you're at your rope's end, what can you do? What did Peter do when he was sinking beneath the waves? Lord, save me. And what did the Lord do? I saw a hand or something. Yes, sir.
I don't know if you ever heard the psychoanalysis of King Saul. But I remember two words. I think the guy, they give him a 4-word psychoanalysis.
Psychoanalysis.
I remember two of them. I remember was I think egocentric and I think diabolical.
He was diabolical, that's true.
Was two of the words they gave.
Narcissistic would be a word you could use.
That sounded like one of them.
Yeah.
That was the third one. But there was a fourth one I can't think of.
Well, evil.
I think that was, I want to say, Dr. Gatson over there in South Carolina, that preacher over there. But, could have been someone else.
Well, here's a thought I want to leave with you before we close our class tonight. By the way, you were reading something the other day about David and what part of David's life. How was that question put to you in that little thing you were doing? How was
about which ones were the obvious hand of God and which ones were not?
Yeah.
So obvious.
Who does that study?
The digging deep.
Digging Deep. Who does it?
Cindy Collins.
Cindy Colley. Yeah. Liddy was reading this on the way to Tennessee the other day, and Sidney Colley has this little exercise, and they're reading about the life of David, and where the hand of God is obvious in delivering David, and sometimes it appears obvious, sometimes it doesn't appear obvious. But when you read the Psalms, as we did last week, it's very clear David always credited God with delivering him. And if David was alive, it's because God kept me alive. And that's how David saw it. But before David did anything, whether he escaped from one place to the next, or whether he would go invade a city to deliver it from the Philistines, or whatever he was doing, what did David always do first?
Praise the Lord.
You know, when we come to a worship service, and we enter into a worship service, our mindset, first and foremost, must be, what would God have us to do? And you say, well, we got that figured out, preacher. We know because we've been doing this a long time. Well, I understand that. But I'm saying it's a mindset. It's an outlook, an attitude. It's a way of looking at everything we do, but particularly as it involves our religious devotion. When we think about serving God, it must always be with a deference to, what would God have me to do? And I'm saying that because you know as well as I do, the average church-going person today does not think that way. That's not how they reason. When they're thinking about how we go to church and which church we go to and how we worship and what we teach, what we preach, or whatever it is, what are they first asking themselves? Do I like it? Does this work for me?
What's in it for me?
Or yeah, what's in it for me? Or does it work for me? Or am I going to get something out of this? It's never, what would God have me to do? And how would God have me to worship? How would God have me to live my life, order my life, whatever? What is God's will always? You can break that down in any part of your life. I know some of you are recently unemployed, and some of you are recently re-employed. And that's going to happen in the life of any congregation. Some are just getting new jobs, and some have just lost jobs. And sometimes that's unfortunate. Sometimes you're like, I'm glad that's over with. Or you're glad you got a new job and you have a new source of income and all those kinds of things. But whenever you're transitioning, should I quit this job? Should I seek another job? Should I seek that job? What would be a wise thing to do?
Ask the Lord.
Should we appoint more deacons, more elders? Should we have new Bible class teachers? Should we go in a different direction in our Bible class program? Should we have gospel meetings? Should we, whatever we do, should we stop and ask? I mean, I think sometimes we really need to reflect upon what David was doing and his success in life, because he was always succeeding, because before he stepped forward, he was always asking, what would God have me to do? What is the will of the Lord in this particular matter? And that, I believe, should be paramount with each and every one of us. Any questions or comments along these lines? I think we've got about 1 or 2 minutes. Yes, sir.
I think the perpetual smile of heaven.
The who what?
The perpetual smile of heaven.
He wasn't living right. But overall, I think as a general rule, you say God was pleased with David. David was by no means. Yes, sir.
Was always on David.
Yes. Well, not always. There were times seeing, just as you read this history, the kind of man, kind of character that David was, and that will really be evident when we get into the next few chapters. Thank you all for your time and attention tonight. Bells rang, right? I sure are quiet tonight. Yes, sir.
Yes, I was saying, you were saying, you think one of those descriptions of him would be a narcissist? Or
Yes, sir.
Yeah, that sounded like one of the four descriptions, Dr. Jackson over there in South Carolina gave.
He was certainly narcissistic. He eat up with himself, how we say it. Self-love, self-interest.
It went along those lines somewhere. I just thought it was interesting. You heard no one give him a psychoanalysis like that before, you know.
Uh-huh.
I was in Savannah, preaching in Savannah, Fifth Street Church of Christ. Attorney Judge Lenny Jordan, you ever heard of him?
I don't believe I have, no.
He's the guy handling that court case in Columbia, Georgia,
Columbus.
Yeah, that preacher that got in serious trouble over there in Columbus. Look, watch the news on that. That was the Church of Christ preacher.
I hadn't heard that.
Then his daughter was my old preacher before he was a full lawyer down in Maryland. So that's why I joined his church in Savannah. He's an attorney in the church and a judge in the church. He's the one handling that court case.
I see. What's your number? 814. Number 814, please, in your songbooks. I think I saw something on Facebook yesterday about the shooting in Kentucky at the high school, or the middle school, where it was. Was it high school? Yeah. That the 16-year-old, one of them was a member of the church. Remember the Church of Christ there? Yeah, Christian Chronicle had that on Facebook yesterday. Very tragic situation. Was it 18 people that were shot and 2 that were killed? Was that, I think, the number last I heard? Yeah, Benton, Kentucky. Yeah, one of them was the 16-year-old was a member of the Church of Christ there in that town. Anyway, our hearts and prayers, of course, go out to them. The Secret Sister program, ladies interested in participating in this program, please see Julie Wilson for a forum tonight. We're going to be drawing names this coming Sunday. Now, area-wide singing at Bremen will be this Friday, this 26th at 7 o'clock. Refreshments will be served following the singing. Don't forget the youth rally hosted by West Georgia this Saturday. Registration begins at 8:45, and the scheduled schedule ends with lunch. And the speaker is Spencer Broom. The theme is The Sower Sows the Word. Check Youth Group Facebook group for more information on this. Also, don't forget the memorial service for Karen Stone's father-in-law this Saturday from 11 to 1 is the visitation, and 1 o'clock, of course, for the service at Jay Collins. Also, there's something I want to tell you about. It's kind of wonderful, interesting at the same time. Adopt a Shut-In is a new program that one of our deacons is pushing. If you'd be interested in adopting a shut-in or a member with specific needs, please see Adam or Angela Gray, and they'll get you set up. I think it's going to be a really neat way of helping those who are in need among us. Also want to make mention of Ginger Pettingill's father, who had another stroke, and they're not with us again tonight. And his situation, last I heard, was still touch and go, and he's had some serious health issues, and certainly want to remember her and this family in our prayers. Also, again, my mother-in-law is with us, and we extend our sympathy to her and to our family for the passing of a very good man, Larry Bingham. His funeral was past Friday, and Gwen is going to be here with us now for the foreseeable future, and probably going to just tie her down, not let her leave again. And so we're very glad to have her in our midst. Are there any other individuals you mentioned on our prayer list tonight?
My uncle has cancer of the lung.
Oh, no.
And he's got a spot. They're going to try to take it off when he's like 75 years old.
Oh, boy.
Worried about it.
What's his name?
Claude Jones.
Okay. Make sure we get that mentioned for Deanna. Claude Jones, that's your uncle. I certainly remember him in our prayers. And your song is 814, correct? Song of invitation and encouragement. We'll be singing tonight. We've been studying about David and Saul tonight. Two very different men of very different characters. And yet, when you read the text, both men talked about God quite a bit. It's fascinating in a way, tragically sad, but nevertheless, Saul, on more than one occasion, credited God with delivering David into his hands. Yeah, that's right. Thank you, God, for delivering this innocent man so I can unjustly destroy him. That's how he was thinking in his madness. But my point is, for someone to think that all is well between themselves and God is a good thing. We all want to believe that things are good between me and the good Lord. Who doesn't want to think that? We all want to believe that. But there's only one way to know for sure that, in fact, my situation with God is secure. Jesus said, not everyone that saith unto me, Lord, Lord, shall enter into the kingdom of heaven. But he that doeth the will of my Father which is in heaven. Matthew 7:21. A lot of people claim God to be their best friend. They talk to him every day. They expect to see him when they die. But unless we are in Christ, we are without God and without hope, regardless of what we think or how we feel. The only way to know that I'm right is to check my life out in light of God's Word. Are you living according to this Word? Have you obeyed the terms of the gospel as outlined in this book? Are you subject to heaven's invitation? Can we assist you in any way? If so, please make that need known while together we stand as we